the board work session of the MARTA Board of Directors to order. Good to see everyone. The first item I would like to put on the agenda is a motion to approve the January 12th, 2023 work session minutes. May I have a motion? It has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Please vote. Thank you very much. The minutes have been adopted. The next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I just have two brief things that I'd like to update my colleagues on. First, I had the distinct honor and privilege to participate in two Transit Equity Day events last week. The first one was with immediate past Chair Rita Scott and Collie, hosted by the Atlanta North Georgia Labor Council, as well as our partners at the ATU at the West End Station. And we thank MARTA for their hard work and participation, and also getting the 1956 bus out there, which was a very appropriate and meaningful backdrop as we celebrated the life and legacy of Rosa Parks, as well as rededicating ourselves to equitable transit for all. I'm going to steal Collie's quote, but it's important that he made this in both speeches last week. But MARTA gets you where you're going to get you where you're going. And I think that it's really important for us to rededicate ourselves to the idea of transit equity and explain over and over and educate that whether you ride transit or not, it's important to our community. So that was a great event. Later on that week, on Friday, February 3rd, we joined Mayor Dickens and his senior staff at the King Memorial Station for a similar event. This one was more of a press conference, but similarly, we were celebrating Transit Equity Day and the life and legacy of Mrs. Parks. Any questions on that from my colleagues? Ms. Scott, would you like to add anything else? I know you were instrumental in the event.
Would just like to say thanks to everyone that made sure the buses were there. Those buses always create the nostalgia of where we were then, where we are now, and where we need to go. And thank you for showing up and for participating, and thank you, Collie, as well. It was very impressive. I drove there, but the others marched there. So I'm sure that you guys drove there as well. So by the time those that are participating actually walk the mile and a half during the march, there's a certain feeling, and those buses really bring about where we've been, where we need to go, and where we are now. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for the kind invitation. I will share that when my friends on MARTA Communications put a blip of my speech on social media, my wife pointed out that I ended a sentence with a preposition. So I've got to really bone up on my public speaking skills.
Did she critique me at all?
No, she did not. She said you did it perfectly. The second item on my agenda, I want to update the board on the ethics matter that we voted on in executive session last month. And the only real update I have to share is, as you may know, the ethics panel, when it's impaneled, requires appointees from the DeKalb County Bar Association, the Atlanta Bar Association, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, the DeKalb Chamber of Commerce, and MARTOC. And so Justice Sears sent out those letters to all of those agencies for appointees on that panel. She has asked to receive those appointees from those various different organizations no later than February 28th, and then it will be in the custody, the matter and the process will be in the custody of Mrs. Powers, and so there should be more to update on in March, but that is what I have to report on that now. Justice Sears, Mr. Andrews, do you have anything else on that?
I just wanted to add that I think you misstated that we voted in an executive session last
Oh,
meeting.
sorry.
It was right after executive session. That was the only thing I was going to add. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that correction. And with that, that is everything on my agenda, and I'm happy now to turn it over to General Manager and CEO Collie Greenwood.
Thank you, Chairworthy, and good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to provide a few updates, if you'll indulge. First of all, there's a DBE Roundtable initiative that MARTA has been involved with. We hosted a disadvantaged business enterprise roundtable series with 13 DBEs invited to participate. The program included an initial session held on September 9th, and then a follow-up session on December 9th. It was all aimed at creating an environment that's more conducive to DBEs working successfully with MARTA and tackling some of the pain points inherent in that relationship. I'm going to ask Paula Nash to join us. Paula is the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and she'll share details of those pain points and our early results and maybe some of the reaction from the DBE community. Paula?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paula Nash. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And for those of you that were here in September, I came before you and said that there were a couple of upcoming events that our office would be hosting, one of which was the DBE Small Business Roundtable event. So today I'm here to kind of just give an overview of that event and some of the lessons learned and as well as some of the improvements that we have put into place. Next slide, please. As Mr. Greenwood just said, there were 13 firms invited to participate. Those are the firms that are listed on this slide. The program included an initial session in September, it was September 9th, and a follow-up report out session held on December 9th. Next slide, please. So we believe these sessions proved to be extremely fruitful. There was open and honest dialogue. MARTA's leadership was represented by Mr. Greenwood, as well as board members, Ms. Stacy Blakely and Ms. Rita Scott. And then there were several members of MARTA's executive leadership team. Topics included timely payments for prime consultants. There was some confusion around FAR overhead audit requirements, or Federal Acquisition Regulation overhead audit requirements. And then we also dealt with challenges in regards to communication and opportunities. We learned that one of the difficult things for DBE sub-consultants was navigating who to communicate with at MARTA. So that's an issue that we dealt with the communication. So as was shown with the 13 DBE participants, we tried to pull a group of participants that were diverse, that range diverse in what they do, their companies, as well as some that had been doing business with MARTA for a good while and some that were fairly new with doing business with MARTA. One of the lessons learned there was that in future DBE small business roundtables, we'll try to get like businesses together around the table. Different businesses have different concerns or issues based on what type of business they have. And so, for instance, we'll try to get professional services businesses together and then maybe deal with construction businesses separately together so that we're looking at the same concerns. Next slide, please. So some of the outcomes. MARTA is happy to note several outcomes which included updates to bid documents to make them more robust and to change the DBE language to both clarify what is needed to meet the DBE goals, as well as to make sure that those documents are being presented up front when the bids are submitted. Also, formal policy letters have already been issued for audits and provisional overhead rates. Payment policies have been implemented for pending audit approval. And finally, a brand new module has been created for our online invoicing system, that system we call OLIS. Sub-consultants can now log into OLIS and see their invoice amounts, the dates that they were submitted, and where in the approval process their invoices lie. And this is a big deal because one of the payment concerns that was raised by the DBE consultants is that they submit invoices to the primes, and it's the primes that then submit it into OLIS, but the sub-consultants could not see when they were actually submitted into OLIS. So they had no real idea of when they could expect payment. So this kind of gives them a opportunity, it's transparency, it's opportunity for them to see the invoices and follow it along the way. Next slide, please. So also out of the Roundtable event came monitoring improvements, contract monitoring improvements. So 2 additional staff have been added to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to monitor our capital projects. And so I should say, monitoring for us doesn't just mean DBE monitoring or reviewing DBE participation and eliminating the deficiencies, though that is one real important part of monitoring. But it also includes resolving payment issues. It includes going on site to ensure that the DBE firms are actually there, and also doing what we call a CUF report, but it's a commercially useful function report, making sure that the DBEs are actually doing the business that they are supposed to be doing, essentially what we have, as far as the contract goes, the scope of the business that has been assigned to that DBE, and not just not doing anything, basically just being on site. But we want to make sure that they're actually doing business there. One other thing that came out of the DBE Roundtable is that in an effort of transparency, the board will receive a DBE review of some of our major contracts. And we're going to do that annually, with the first one starting this month at our Planning and Capital Projects Committee meeting. So MARTA plans to host 2 of these roundtable events annually. And so we will have the next one start in June. Next slide, please. So since we are talking about the DBE program and achievements, I wanted to give you an update on how federal fiscal year 2022 turned out and our overall goal achievements for federal fiscal year 2022. MARTA's 3-year DBE goal is 23%. What we did in 2022 was 28.2%. And I want to point out that 10.8% of that was done through race-conscious means, meaning we put goals on the contracts, and it came from that way. But 17.4% was done through race-neutral means, which means that either it was a DBE prime that got the contract, which is a good thing, or some prime firms exceeded the goal that we actually put on the contract, which is also a good thing. And I wanted to show those differences because what the FTA encourages is, as we try to meet our goal, that we try to do as much as possible to try to meet it through race-neutral means. So that's why events like, or the series like this DBE Roundtable are very important, because it helps us reach out to DBE firms and just encourage them to, and take obstacles away from them being able to bid on projects. Particularly, we'd love for them to start bidding as primes, but just bidding in general on projects. Next slide. All right, and that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. I appreciate that. And we appreciate your leadership in this. Looking forward to your continued efforts as we continue to improve on the established diversification efforts of the authority, and really thereby moving our projects forward faster. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Nash, as I understand it, and I may have this completely wrong, but as I understand it, in addition to all of your DBE work for our contractors and people that are doing work with MARTA, you are also a certifying agency for DBE firms within the city, and I think it's you and DOT that are the two certifying agencies?
Yes,
is that correct?
Yes, it is MARTA and GDOT, and we certify all of the DBE firms within Georgia. MARTA concentrates on City of Atlanta, Fulton County, DeKalb County, and Clayton County, our service area.
How much of a workload, I know that it's very important, but how much of a workload is that external certification process on your department? You know, this is kind of a nebulous question. I know you can't answer it directly, but you're doing a lot of work in your department for companies that are not even working with MARTA, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And how many staffers do you have on that let's call it your external team?
So for that, we have 3 staffers.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you need more? That's not a trick question.
I do need more. And where I need them is not so much for the external team, even though that could possibly use more as well, but probably the monitoring that I've been talking about. So even with the 2 that we've added, it's 4 people, and there's the 2 of them that are focusing on pre-contract initiatives that have to happen. And they're also focusing on outreach, but the monitoring, there's roughly 400 contracts at MARTA with maybe 1,000 DBEs. So there's where we've run into the struggle.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks again, Paula.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask Chief Scott Crater to join us on behalf of MPD, the MARTA Police Department, and just kind of talk about the challenges and successes MARTA has had in this area. It's a very important area, and provide some insight into our posture moving forward. Chief?
Good morning. Good morning,
Morning.
Chairman Worthy, MARTA Board. Yes, Chairman, we do need more. Throw that out there. I want to thank Collie, the MARTOC meeting the other day. Very kind words for the women and men of the police department. I want to thank you personally for that, because they do work hard, and this is going to show the work that they did in 2022. Next slide. So, the MARTA Police Department has to report to what's called the UCR, the Uniform Crime Report. And that's the FBI's report they put out annually. And it's a calendar year report. Although MARTA works on a fiscal year, we do have to report out annually on our crime. So what this slide shows you is our overall crime reduction of 17% reduction in crime, Part 1 crimes in the year 2022. That's an amazing feat. That is also very comparable to our ridership, because last year our numbers were very low also, but that was due to comparing the previous year being our first COVID year. This is the first year we've really done apples to apples, and I'm proud to present this to you. really shows the work that these women and men do every day on our system. Being significantly short staffing-wise, this is still an amazing figure. When you look around the region, you see our partners around the region not doing this well, and I think this is a testament to their work. 17% is not easy. 195 crimes for the entire year is amazing. Next slide. Same here with our operator assaults. We worked a couple of years ago to implement a de-escalation training for our operators, supervisors, both in rail and bus, and I think we're starting to see that pay off. We continue to provide that training for our operators. 42% reduction in operator assaults last year. That, again, I think a large part of that is due to the operators being able to de-escalate and call the police when they need us versus trying to react to the situation. So I think that's really working out the best for us. Next slide. So as you know, we have a Ride with Respect program that the board here helped us solidify some changes early last year, or about mid last year. And this is our totals for the year. If you look with the suspensions, that's about 446 suspensions a month, with 19 a month being a year suspension and 6 per month being a permanent ban. Some of the changes we made mid-year last year are a reason why some of those numbers are larger on the year and 1 year and the permanent bans. We have a new tool that they use called repeat offender. So if we see an individual that continually gets suspended from our system for violating our rules or the laws, we can do permanent bans based on that repeat offender section that we have in the program now. And that's starting to show dividends also. Next slide. So last year we saw where we really needed to concentrate on the trains. We felt we needed to start an overtime detail. We did that in the spring last year. We had a lot of success with the community. We got a lot of positive feedback on the presence on the train. So we did this again back in November, and it'll finish up as it sits now Friday, tomorrow. But we're going to continue with Collie's blessing next week. We're going to downsize it just a little bit, but we're going to continue that presence on the train. And if you can see, these are 3 shifts per day of a group of officers, and their sole responsibility is to be on the train system. And as you can see, 466 a week. We wake people up. We eject about 170 a week during this time period. 154 ejected out of the stations. 60 suspensions, 49 arrests, and more importantly, I think, are these referrals. As you know, homelessness is not a crime, and we don't want to treat it that way, but we do want to be able to enforce the rules for our riders. So we do use the HOPE team, both with MARTA and with the City of Atlanta, to help us in those referral processes. Next slide. So internally, we have 3 groups that work with our partners in the region. This first group is our plainclothes detail. These individuals work every day in plain clothes, not in uniform, and they work the system for crime or policy violations on our system. Colleen and I spoke earlier late last year, and we wanted to kind of solidify and make this a permanent group. One of the things that you learn from what you saw in Memphis, there's 2 things where special details go awry. One is lack of supervision, and one is lack of training. So I told my folks we're going to make this a permanent detail, and we're going to have quarterly training with our supervision in our training unit and outside MARTA if we need to. But they will be required to attend quarterly training to update all the things they need to do the job. If you look at some of those numbers, those are very impressive. Almost 90 wanted people taken off the system by this group alone here. So they've done really good work. Next slide. This is our joint bike detail that we have with the Atlanta Police Department here at Lindbergh. Again, this was a need that we saw not only for us but for APD in this general area, because what's across the street from MARTA property is our problem too. So we began this about a year ago, and their results are at the bottom there. A lot of calls for service, but mostly a lot of presence in the area. I think people comment a lot to me personally and through emails and phone calls that they're glad to see them on the bikes and in the area looking out for each other. Next slide. This last detail is downtown at our Central Precinct, 5 Points. It's a joint detail with Georgia State University. and the Atlanta Police Department. These three individuals, they rotate out a little bit, the other jurisdictions, and we do too, but there's always three of them. And what they do is they patrol the area around the station. So Alabama, Broad Street, Peachtree, all that area out there that you see that has those challenges out there, they keep an eye on the external part of the footprint of the station, along with GSU and APD helping out. They also work with our plainclothes detail and APD. The Garnett Station, if you know, is kind of a tough area. There's a lot of challenges on Forsyth Street, and they do about 3 or 4 details a month, combined together and work on crime details just in that general area. And I think we've seen a significant decrease in our crime and our loitering and just rule breaking around the Garnett Station and in the Garnett Station itself. So they've been doing a good job with that. Next slide. So hiring, as we know, it's tough to hire police officers. We started off in December last year with 62 vacancies. By the end of the month in early January, we were down to 52. So our background and recruitment section is working really hard. As of yesterday, this year, they've accepted about 58 applications for a sworn police officer, compared to last year it was about 27. So we're starting to see that increase in that desire. And part of that is the HR package that Kylie and the C team helped me put together, and with his approval, we've got some incentives out there to attract and retain really good police officers. Because if anybody will ask you, I'm very picky about signing yes to an applicant. We don't want to bring anybody in our department that doesn't match our culture, and we're going to keep it that way. So very picky about who we bring in the door. But saying that, I think we're in the right direction. We've reversed that trend to where we're hiring now more than we're losing. But stand by. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. But I'm very confident. They've got 3 more job fairs coming up in the next week and a half, 2 weeks. I've given them a very lofty goal of hiring 30% more officers this year than we did last year. So they're working hard to meet that goal. Next slide, please. Just some high-level significant accomplishments. Of course, the crime reduction and the operator assaults. One of the things I'm proud of that hopefully will continue is that in 2022 we had 0 new litigation complaints against the MARTA Police Department. I think if you look around the country and you see what's going on, I think that's a pretty amazing accomplishment. I think I contribute that not only to the women and men that work here, but the supervisors doing their jobs to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. So I constantly talk to our sergeants and our lieutenants. Those are our frontline supervisors. It's their job to make sure that they intervene and they make sure that our officers are doing what they should be doing. We closed all our open caps with GDOT, which was a big deal for a while there. We replaced our CAD RMS system. The board approved that contract with Central Square, and they're in the process of doing that. I think we're about 1.5 years project-wise to get it fully implemented. The portable trailer cameras, the committee passed that a couple of weeks ago. It goes before you today. We want to purchase 20 portable trailer cameras. They're solar trailer cameras for our parking lots and our garages. What we want to do is kind of alleviate some of the staffing stresses from the precincts, get them out of the parking lots and into the stations and on the trains, and try to use these as our crime fighting tool in these service lots. We had a successful tabletop exercise with our partners internally at the World Congress Center back in November. It's important we do 2 a year. We do 1 externally with all our partners in the region, and then we do 1 internally for our bus operators and our employees to make sure they know what they need to be doing. Worked on our attrition, reversing the vacancy rate. About 1 year ago, we implemented a internship program with Georgia State University. So they have a criminal justice program that's very well known around the country. And we accept 5 paid internships every semester for them to come work at MARTA. And we've hired 2 people, I believe, so far out of those classes. So that's come to show some fruition there. Rise with Respect program, again, we strengthened that thanks to you and the board for helping us with that. And of course, we had huge success in our Peachtree Road Race, 4th of July events, and our Peach Drop this year. thanks to the hard work of our department and our men and women. So with that, I think that's it. You can go to the next slide. Yep. So I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Those are great results, testament to the investment that you've made in organizational culture and our values. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Lots of good news there.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have two exciting financing issues to share with you. Well, they're exciting to a CFO. Well, time will tell if they're exciting to everyone else in the room. These are brief. They're separate but related, and with the potential really to create some substantial savings to MARTA on our debt service. So with that, our CFO, Raj Srinath, can you take it away?
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Good afternoon, Chairworthy and members of the board. As Mr. Greenwood mentioned, there are two near-term financing initiatives we would like to brief you on. I'm going to provide a high-level summary of those two, and Kevin Hurley, our Deputy CFO, will go through some of the details on that. The first one is the bond validation. Per MARTA Act, as well as the Georgia Revenue Bond Act, any revenue bonds, by the way, MARTA issues revenue bonds, have to go through what's called a validation process before they're issued. In other words, a validation establishes that the bonds are legal. More importantly, they're legally incontestable, if you will, and the security is valid. And simply stated, we cannot issue bonds unless they're validated. And the second one are two kind of innovative refinancing or refunding opportunities on bonds we have issued previously. And collectively, they're estimated to achieve savings in the range of about $20 to $35 million over the remaining life of those bonds. Translated in present value terms, they between 15 to 25 million. With that, with your permission, I'll turn it over to Kevin Hurley. Kevin, you can provide the details.
Thank you, Raj. Good afternoon, Chairman Worthy, members of the MARTA Board of Directors, and Mr. Greenwood. As for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to present before, Raj made an introduction. I'm Kevin Hurley, the Deputy CFO here at MARTA. And before I get into it, I did want to share that we've got some of our legal counsel in the room today. They're extraordinary people that help us do these transactions. We have Woody Vaughn and Allison Dyer from Holland and Knight, and Tanel Lockett from Townsend and Lockett. Tongue twister here. They help us on our financial transactions and represent the bond counsel. We have other folks that assist as well, but it's nice to have their support. As Raj said, I'm here to brief you on bond validation and refinancings. You can go to the next slide, please. And here's our agenda for today. Bond validation, the process to approve additional bond validation, current status of our existing validation, the timeline to move this process forward, and then I'm going to talk about the two refinancing opportunities in short. Next slide, please. As Raj said, the bond validation is required by the MARTA Act and Georgia Revenue Bond Law in order to issue bonds. The validation establishes that the bonds and the underlying security for the bonds, which is MARTA's sales tax and vehicle title ad valorem tax, is valid and legally incontestable. I also wanted to note that the bond validation is consumed whether the issue of the bonds is for new money or for a refinancing transaction like we're going to discuss later. Due to the lengthy time that it takes to validate bonds, MARTA pre-validates a dollar amount for potential transactions in the future. The potential transactions are based on MARTA's anticipated debt needs to support the capital improvement program and any potential bond refinancings that we see out there in the next 3 to 5 years. To initiate the validation process, The Board of Directors approves a resolution for additional validation authorization. I want to point out that this authorization does not give staff the ability to issue debt or execute refinancings. Each transaction will be brought back to the board for review and approval separately as those transactions are executed. The board approval is followed by a petition and complaint being filed with the Fulton County Superior Court, with all MARTA jurisdictions being parties to the proceedings. Next slide, please. So the current status of our existing validation. A little history, MARTA's most recent validations were done for $700 million in 2019 and $800 million in 2020. The 2019 amount was a little bit smaller than we would typically ask for, and that was due to the 15th Amendment not yet being adopted. We followed that shortly thereafter with the $800 million request, and that request was done after the 15th Amendment was adopted. This validation also allowed for the incorporation of the City of Atlanta half penny to be pledged to bondholders, which further enhances MARTA's credit. The existing validation is about $490 million. The near-term transactions being brought to the board in the coming months will consume between $250 and $450 million of that available validation. So this is where I wanted to point out that these transactions that I'm going to talk about subsequent intertwine with this, because we're going to consume the remaining of validation to execute the following transactions. So we'll have very little, if any, capacity remaining. MARTA staff will be requesting at the February Business Management Committee approval of a resolution authorizing an additional $1.8 billion in validation authority. The estimate includes $1.3 billion to support the capital improvement program and about $500 million to support potential bond refinancings. Next slide, please. The bond validation timeline consists of the following. This introductory briefing that I'm giving you today, it'll be followed by an additional validation resolution being presented at the February 23rd Business Management Committee meeting, and it'll be subsequently followed being presented to the full board for approval on March 9th. The city and county attorneys will be pre-briefed in March prior to the mid-March filing of the petition and complaint. A hearing on the matter would be scheduled within 20 days of the filing in early April, with MARTA, county, and city attorneys filing answers prior to the hearing date. The hearing would be conducted, and subsequently a validation order would be given in late April or early May. So this would replenish our validation authority, and we could execute another $1.8 billion of transactions prior to having to do this again. Next slide, please. Yes, sir. The amount, historically we've done between around $1.5 billion, but we take our 10-year capital program, and when we model that program, we're anticipating a certain amount of debt needs to help pay for that program. So we look out at that program and we say, oh, we're going to need about $1 billion in debt for the next 10 years to execute the capital program as designed. And then we also look at the bonds that we have outstanding, and many of them will fall into a window where we can refinance them. And so if the markets are right, we may choose to refinance them, but we know they're falling into this window in particular times. And so it's just an estimate on what we would anticipate over the next 3 to 5 years. This is, you all would set the cap for the level of transaction volume that we can do without coming back and getting additional approval. But there is no cap on how many times you can do this. Yes, sir. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now I wanted to get into the refinancings that Raj alluded to. The first transaction is called a tender transaction, and it's on MARTA's taxable bond series 2020B and 2021D. And this is similar to a transaction that we did in 2021 that the board reviewed and approved that actually saved us $47 million in debt service savings. The maximum value of this transaction is going to be the $490.8 million in validation authority that we have left, but due to the nature of the transaction, we anticipate it'll be between $180 to $200 million. This transaction allows MARTA bondholders to actually sell their taxable bonds back to MARTA at a premium, with MARTA then selling lower interest rate tax exempt bonds to pay off the purchase of the tendered bonds. The second transaction is termed a cash optimization transaction of the Series 2007A bonds. These bonds technically cannot be refunded as they were refunded previously. MARTA plans to defease these bonds or fund an escrow account to pay off the bonds with cash, and then 15 days later issue new money bonds at lower interest rates to reimburse MARTA for the cash used to fund the escrow account. We have to wait those 15 days because of tax reasons, and by the guidance of counsel, we would meet the requirements to execute the transaction. It's also nice because we've run the sales tax surpluses because of the COVID relief funding driving it ultimately. We have cash on hand that will allow us to put this cash outlay out there to set up the escrow and not have to do anything for 15 days or so in order to reimburse ourselves. So having cash available is an important part of it as well. The second transaction, oh, that's the one I just went through. The combined estimated net present value savings of these efforts, as Raj alluded to, is going to be $20 to $35 million is what we anticipate. Next slide, please. I think you went a little bit too far back one. There we go. Some key points to the refinancing. As alluded to previously, we have a strong, experienced underwriting firm, and this is directly as a result of the board working with us a couple of years ago to put our negotiated underwriting pool together. Without us doing that, we would not have the ability to do these transactions through a standard bid process. They're just too complicated. Both of the new bond series that we're going to issue will be designated green bonds by a second party verifier. The tender transaction will price on March 8th and be presented for approval directly to the full board at the March 9th board meeting, with a closing on April 4th. The Series 2007A cash optimization transaction requires a resolution to defease the Series 2007A bonds. That we're asking to be approved by the full board at the March 9th board meeting. And then staff will actually defease those bonds on April 25th. Then pricing for the new money bonds to reimburse MARTA's cash outlay will be presented at the May 11th full board, with a closing planned for May 17th. Next slide, please. So to sum everything up, On the February 23rd, Business Management Committee will be asked to approve the additional validation resolution, which you will receive a more detailed briefing on, and you will receive a more detailed briefing on the reference financings. On March 9th, the full board will be asked to approve a resolution for the sale, execution, and delivery of the Tender Series 2023A bonds, as well as approval of a resolution to defease the Series 2007A bonds. And then on May 11th, the full board will be asked to approve a resolution for the sale, execution, delivery, and pricing of the Series 2023 bonds that will reimburse MARTA for its cash outlay to defease the 2007A series. Next slide. Thank you.
All right, thank
So
you, Kevin.
Wasn't that exciting?
It was. It was, as promised. I want to thank both Kevin and Raj for that, and really just thank them for keeping their eye on the ball in terms of the ever-changing financial landscape, always keeping MARTA abreast of those changes and in a position to make good on opportunities to keep our budgets strong. So thank you very much, gents.
Mr. Greenwood, we have some questions. Mr. Frierson, I saw you first.
Okay, sure, thank you. I appreciate the information. I remember back in 2021 when we did the initial refinancing of those bonds that saved us $47 million. That was a creative way to do this financing package. And Raj, that's when you came on board. So at that moment, I knew you were the man. Okay.
Actually, the reason we were able to do, or we had to resort to all of these things, in 2017, there was a legislation passed. It was called the Tax Reduction and Jobs Act, I think, pursuant to which certain types of refinancings were prevented. We were prevented from doing, such as advance refunding. That's why we have to do all of this to get more juice out of our debt portfolio, if you will.
Well, great. Once again, I think that was a great move, and I know with the staff and with Kevin and the entire staff worked to make that happen. So, so here we are again looking at refinancing. And my question has to do with these Series 2007 ones that we have that you're going to take cash and pay for. Are there situations where when we pay for these bonds in advance, is there a penalty that we have to cash in on these bonds, or is that just
no?
I mean, we pay the investors for what they invested in the bonds, and we take them and we can do refinance them basically.
Most of the bonds we issue, I mean, this is typical of many of the transit agencies, have what are called a 10-year par call option. In other words, if you try and tender or call the bonds before 10 years, yes, there could be a premium, but 10 years and later, we have the ability to call them at par.
Okay,
That's
it was a 10-year
typically
period.
how it's
So, okay,
done.
great. Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Thanks.
Mr. Durrett.
Yeah, thank you. Validation of bonds is really an independent analysis of the organization's fiscal health and likely future tax collections in order to be able to pay the bondholders. Is that correct?
I'll answer that, then Kevin, you can, or council can chime in too. It's not as much about the health of the organization, of course, that's critical as well. It's about the underlying security of the bonds, which is the sales tax.
Right.
So it makes sure we do have sales tax projections. Number one, the bond, it's a legal instrument, if you will, that's valid, and the underlying security is there to pay off the bondholders as and when our obligations arise.
And so I guess my question is, for what period of time does the validation hold? Because you are looking into the future, and I guess you've got to be conservative.
Yeah.
So I saw you said in an early slide 3 to 5 year outlook, and so is that sort of the period that a validation would be good for, or is it good until you use up your capacity?
The latter. Until we use up the capacity, the 3 to 5, the amount of validation we are requesting is based on what we may need in about 5 years from now, or in the next 5 years, the next 5 years. So our capital program right now assumes issuance of about $1.3 billion over the next 5 years. Plus, there may be some potential refinancings also. We estimate that to be about $500 million, hence the total 1.8, and they remain valid till they're used.
And you may or may not use
That's
that.
correct.
Depends on the situation out there. There's no savings to be found, but you've still got that validation there.
You're
to
absolutely
be
right.
able to work with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Pond?
Thank you. I know your team is very good at looking at these things and have done a good job in the past. Just for my own information, rates have been going up significantly since 2020, and
Right.
I know you're looking out beyond 10 years, but I'm just, give me a 101 course in why bonds would be less
That-
costly in 2023 versus 2020.
Extremely valid point. The 2020 bonds we are planning on refinancings were issued as taxable bonds. They were issued to refund bonds that were previously issued, and hence, after the passage of the 2017 Act, we could not refund those bonds in advance using tax exempt. So we issued taxable bonds, still achieved, as Mr. Frierson said, about $47 million in PV savings. Now we have an opportunity based on the dislocation between taxable and tax exempt. We can issue tax exempt rates and take out the taxable bonds.
Any other questions? Ms. Gabe?
Yep. Well, first off, this is exciting, so thank you, Kali. I like bonds. But just a question, and I know this may be for a future board update, but as we think about the two groups of bonding capacity going forward, so one, the 491 million that we still have, that we're saying 250, 450 million. Like if you were to, there's probably a lot of different things, but if you were to say, what are the big bucket items that we plan to bond against that? And then the 1.3 billion, obviously a big capital program, but like if you were just to take each one, what are like the big three pieces in those programs that they're going to be used for?
Sure. The 490 remaining right now will be more or less consumed by the two refinancing opportunities that Kevin talked about. The 1.8 we are seeking is what we expect to do over the next 5 years. And 1.3 of that would be based on our capital program. There are a host of projects in that. I'll just name a few. Station rehab, for example. All 38 stations are being rehabbed. Part of that will be funded through pay-as-you-go capital, part through grants, and the other part through debt financing. And there are several capital programs like that. Even the rail car at this point probably will have to issue debt unless something changes in the timeline or usage of monies for other projects. So those are the two big ones I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Raj and Kevin. Just one final item, if you'll indulge. I just wanted to update that MARTA was happy to attend the Coverdale Legislative Building on Tuesday afternoon so that we could provide an update to our MARTOC, our Oversight Overview Committee, chaired by Representative Deborah Silcox. I was joined by Chair Worthy, Mr. Frierson, Ms. Scott, Mr. Jurett, and a number of MARTA execs, many of them in the room. We were graciously afforded the time and the attention to go over a number of matters, including ridership, our station's management plan, homelessness efforts, status of the More MARTA program, and MPD highlights. So these are just about half of the fulsome agenda that we had put together and were able to share with them. So we really appreciated their reception of these updates and the support and encouragement that they declared for MARTA. So I just wanted to leave with that and then turn our attention to some of the upcoming events and meetings of significance. Many of them they're listed in your board packets anyway, but I'll just draw attention to a few. The Riders Advisory Council is going to be in person on March 1st in the HQ atrium downstairs. The MAC MAC committee is going to meet virtually on March 14th at 10 a.m. APTA events include the Legislative Conference in Washington on March 12th, the Board Members Seminar in Birmingham on July 15th, and the Transform Conference in Orlando on October 8th. And with that, Chair Worthy, I'll return the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Any questions for Mr. Greenwood? Okay, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of real estate and litigation. Moved by Hardage, seconded by Durrett. Please vote by show of hands. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. 9th, 2023 Board of Directors of MARTA meeting to order. Mr. Andrews, have you received any public comments to report via email or telephone?
Yes, sir. If you would give me 1 second, I'll pull it up. But we do have one public comment by email from Dr. Ed Williams. This will be attached to the minutes verbatim, but he does speak to the more MARTA projects, the changes in leadership at MARTA. He questions the process for DeKalb and Fulton County municipalities appointing board members or not having more board members. He questions the governor's appointee to the board, and that's pretty much, and then he also speaks to the same thing that he has in his lawsuits that he is appealing currently. But the actual email will be attached verbatim to the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. We have 3 in-person public comments. Just a reminder, we are glad that you are here. Each public comment will be limited to 2 minutes, and I don't anticipate that exceeding our 45-minute limit, so we will begin by order of receipt. Mr. Hammonds, Lance Hammonds. Good afternoon, Mr. Hammonds. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Lance Hammonds. I'm president of the DeKalb NAACP, and I came today just to watch your work and the things that go on on this particular board. But something struck my spirit, and as I hear the different presentations that are being made at our county level, state level, or whatever, the one thing that struck me is that in all the technical discussions and all the political discussions, the thing that I don't think I hear enough is what is the benefit of transit and all these different projects to the citizens? How is it really going to impact me? How is it going to get me to my next job? How is it going to get me to the hospital? And maybe we take it for granted, I'm sure, because I know you guys have a lot of public comment where you get comments from the community. But what I don't hear sometimes is when you're making presentations and when we're talking about transit, we're talking about this kind of mode, this way, this other kind of way. And I would just remind you to, if you could, just remember who all these projects are servicing. They're servicing the public. They're servicing mom and dad and the children or whatever. So I think if you could talk a little bit more about the benefits of transit to a community. Like I'm in DeKalb County. How can I get to a Braves game? Well, it's a long drive. How can I get to the Veterans Hospital? If I'm living in certain parts of the county, it's hard to get there. So again, just think about the benefits and how it impacts the actual citizens. I know you guys are very technical and very expert in transit, but I would just urge you to think more about and expressing how what you're doing and what you're trying to build really impacts each and every citizen in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammonds. Next on the agenda is Mr. Mike Dobbins. Good afternoon, Mr. Dobbins.
Good afternoon, and thank you for letting me appear. I'm Mike Dobbins. I'm a professor of practice at Georgia Tech, and I'm formerly the Commissioner of Planning, Development, and Neighborhood Conservation for the City of Atlanta during the Olympic era. And I'm here to ask you to reconsider the decision to hook up the downtown streetcar to the Beltline up at Ponce. The reasons for that, I've been a big advocate for making that connection to happen. But as I now have, and I hope all of you have too, viewed what actually would happen both to neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, settled areas, streets, and so on, before you even get to the Beltline, and then look at the sort of devastation that would occur on the current use of the Beltline, which is walkers and wheeled vehicles, the topography, the tree cover, and probably more important than that, the orientation of businesses and activities that support the huge and very exciting traffic that the trail itself generates. I passed out, and I think some of you may have received, a description of what I think would need to happen in order to continue to have a transit a system of some sort, but to narrow the amount of space given to the transit, and I describe it in that handout, and to widen the space available for what really does work very well on the belt line on the east side. Lots of traffic, too much traffic, lots of complaints about traffic, lots of issues of safety, and so on and so forth. So basically what I'm proposing is to widen the walking trail from 10 to 12 feet, a little bit of separation, have a wheeled vehicle area for about another 10 feet, and then do what's called light individual transit system for where the right-of-way would have been. And I'd really like you to consider that. Oh, I'm out. Last thing is, I hope you all read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution opinion on Sunday that describes the need to step back a little bit and really reconsider the Beltline project, and particularly the transit component from the get. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dobbins. We appreciate your time as well. Lastly, on the in-person public comments, Jeremiah Jones with Propel Atlanta. Mr. Jones, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I am Jeremiah Jones. I'm here to provide public comment on behalf of Propel ATL and the Southern Environmental Law Center. MARTA and the City of Atlanta officials are working to renegotiate the list of the more MARTA projects due to inflation, escalating cost, and unplanned delays. But there's a critical voice missing from this conversation: taxpayers who voted to make this project possible. More MARTA is what may be a once-in-a-lifetime generational investment in transit that should involve considerable community engagement from voters, taxpayers, and local Atlanta residents who rely on the system for daily travel. We are asking for transparency and public accountability as MARTA and the City of Atlanta seek to change the promises first made in 2016 and finalized in 2018. Every project deprioritized from the more MARTA list will impact access to jobs, schools, libraries, grocery stores, and parks. MARTA and the City of Atlanta should consult with the public and stakeholders in changing the More MARTA program using criteria that are relevant to today's realities. Criteria for an updated More MARTA program should include improving access to public places needed to get to every day, and reducing existing delay and travel times for underserved communities. The list should also include quick fixes such as bus-only lanes and customer experience enhancements such as station improvements and fare system upgrades. It is unfortunate that the More MARTA program original vision won't come to fruition for expanded transit, but deciding how to pare down this vision will be difficult and contentious. These are enormous decisions and must be made in open, transparent, and data-driven fashion. To this end, we are asking MARTA to center reducing existing delayed travel times for historically underserved communities, host robust public engagement meetings throughout the City of Atlanta to get public feedback, reinstate the stakeholder and technical advisory committees, and prepare a comprehensive review of each project cost and benefits. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. The public comment section is now closed. May I now, moving next on the item of the agenda, or moving on to our agenda, to agenda item number 1, may I have a motion to approve the January 12th, 2023 Board of Directors meetings minutes? It has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Board members, please vote. The minutes have been adopted. Moving on, back onto the agenda, agenda item number 2 is the Business Management Committee report. Mr. Durrett.
Mr. Chairman, the Business Management Committee met on Thursday, January 26, 2023, and approved the following resolutions. A, resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for contracts utilizing State of Georgia contracts and/or General Services Administration schedules for network, server, storage equipment, and professional services. And B, resolution authorizing a modification and contractual authorization for parking deck call box upgrade and cabling services, RFPP P49632. I request approval of these resolutions.
May I have a motion and a second? It has been properly moved and seconded. Any questions for Chairman Durrett? Please vote. The motion passes.
The committee received the following briefing: fiscal year 2023 second quarter financial highlights and financial performance indicators as of December 31st of last year. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Durrett. Agenda item number 3 is the Planning and Capital Programs Committee. Due to Ms. Blakely's absence, I will read that report. The Planning and Capital Programs Committee met on Thursday, January 26, 2023, and approved the following resolutions. A resolution authorizing the award of contracts for the procurement of architectural and engineering acoustics and vibration consulting services, REI AE 50180. And B, resolution authorizing the award of a contract for consulting services job order contracting 3.0 program, RFP P50150. I request approval of these resolutions. It has been moved and seconded. Any questions? Board members, please vote. The committee received the following briefings: upcoming procurement for construction services for JOC 3.0, upcoming A&E consultant procurement for final design services of the Bankhead Station expansion and track renovation 4 project, including Buckhead DXO replacement shutdown. This concludes my report.
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier to you, if I may, due to an oversight, a clerical oversight, numbers, the resolutions attached for those briefings are 6, 7, and 8 on your agenda, so we'll be taking those up later.
Yes. All right. Operations and Safety Committee meeting, Chairman Pond.
Mr. Chairman, the Operations and Safety Committee meeting met on Thursday, January 26, 2023, and approved the following resolutions. A resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of solar-powered mobile trailers, IFB B50186. B, resolution authorizing a modification and contractual authorization for professional services for policemen or police psychological pre-employment assessments, L45708. I request approval of these resolutions.
It has been moved and seconded. Any questions? Board members, please vote. The resolutions pass.
The committee also received the following briefings: C, streetcar update and fleet programs. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my report.
Thank you, Chairman Pond. Agenda item number 5, External Relations Committee report. Chairwoman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the External Relations Committee met on Thursday, January 26, 2023, and received the following briefings: Government Affairs, Legislative Update, TR4, Outreach Plan. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Moving back onto the agenda, agenda item number 6, a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of design services of the Bankhead Station expansion. Peter, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, sir. This is part of the process under the MARTA Act, where if we're not going to do an invitation to bid, we have to get approval on the front end to start a non-invitation to bid solicitation. And in this case, we are looking to do an RFP to assist with going from 30% design to 100% design on the Bankhead station expansion.
Any questions for Mr. Andrews? I will entertain a motion for the resolution on agenda item 6. It has been moved and seconded. Please vote. Agenda item number 7 is a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of design services for Atlanta Streetcar East Expansion, AE 50293. Mr. Andrews?
Thank you, sir. This is the same situation. We have approximately 30% design on the Streetcar East Extension. And we were looking to solicit, again, for an RFP for somebody to help go from 30% to 100% design to assist in that project as part of the MARTA program.
Are there any questions? I anticipate there may be some on this one. Mr. Durrett.
Collie, maybe this is a question directed at you, but if we are going from 30% to 100% once we receive these proposals and select the firm or firms to do the work, are we locked into the streetcar as the mode for both the extension of the streetcar to the Beltline and also onto the Beltline?
Thank you, Jim. I believe, you know, we go through this process. The firm gets designed or hired, and they start to do the design. We have a fair bit of time before construction begins. I suspect that there's always room for conversation with our stakeholders. In this case, the City of Atlanta, who has a very strong voice in you know, what mode and what alignment happens in this case. So moving today does not preclude us from those continued conversations.
Thank you.
Mr. Pond.
This was discussed at the previous committee meeting, and there's been a lot of discussion around this project where it'll drop into the program at $200 million. And I know that in the IGA that you're following through with the IGA, putting this forward, trying to keep it on schedule. But it seems to me if there's still some doubt, which in my mind it is this the best way to be spending money right now? We defer this until you can get with the stakeholders for that project, because you're going through procurement, you're going to spend a lot of time and money with your staff. Consultants will be spending a lot of money on these proposals, and that will just be money spent that may just be wiped away if the change in mode. So I see no harm in going forward with this, but I would just feel very strongly that we should pause on going through contracting and going up for procurement till you can spend some time with the stakeholders and also the MARTA reps for the City of Atlanta and be sure that this is a priority for that 7, 8, or 10 projects that we want to focus on.
Yeah. Thank you, Director Pond. You know, I will say that to date we have, there's been about $7 million spent on the file. Overall, it's a $230 million program, as you know. There have been numerous discussions between MARTA and the stakeholders. We have the intergovernmental agreement. We have the, PGC, that governs this, the committee that governs the MARTA Atlanta file. Lots of conversation. And as I said earlier, I think the opportunity for conversation continues. The thing about these deadlines is that it's important for us to get to market on a certain schedule. If we're ever, should those conversations double down and confirm where we believe we're headed at this point, then the delay will have cost us time and in fact more money, you know, in terms of that amount of delay. That's not to say that those conversations can't and won't continue. I think we have a number of engagements with the City of Atlanta where this conversation will continue. But our stakeholders have been very, very clear on this point. You know, there's a lot of conversation, but at the end of the day, they were very clear in terms of their desire on this file. So we understand where it is right now. We understand our role in this agreement, in this partnership, but that's not to say that, you know, that they are not enabling us to continue that conversation, and we will do that.
Ms.
Again-
Hardage.
Again, I'm just wondering if you could put a pause on the solicitation process until we could revisit that with the stakeholders
Yeah.
and be sure this is their priority. It is their project, but there are certainly a lot of questions around that should be the priority. And that's,
Sure, yeah. Is it a question for me to respond, or just something for us to move forward thinking about?
no need to respond. That's just,
Okay.
Ms. Hardage.
I was just going to echo a lot of what Mr. Pond said. Nobody, if you sat around in any of these discussions, we understand the importance of the Beltline project. We understand City of Atlanta and what some of your issues have been. And I don't want to step on any of those issues. And I certainly want those stakeholders to feel like they have a voice in this. But I think technology is changing so quickly and so rapidly in transit. Some of what we've seen in the last 6 or 8 months has just been amazing. And I don't know if taking a step back and just looking and making sure that is what they still want, if there's something equally as good or better, that we don't, you know, that we don't set in stone exactly what's going on, not trying to take any time away from what they're trying to do. But, you know, I think it's just out of an abundance of caution to try to get them exactly what they want so they'll be happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hardage. We concur.
Ms. Ide.
Yes, I just wanted, as a City of Atlanta rep, to say I've spoken to Mayor Dickens within the last week, and he has made this exceptionally clear to me that this is a priority project that he wants to move forward, which isn't to say that we can't have additional conversation. As Mr. Greenwood said, that, you know, I think everybody always wants to have the right information and all the information in front of them, but I wouldn't want to do anything that delays this project either, because from the Atlanta City Council and Mayor Dickens, it's been made very clear that this is a #1 priority to them.
Mr. Zagabe.
Thank you. I would echo everything that Jennifer said. I might just add on, you know, as we go forward, this is a project that's been in discussion for years. There's been millions of dollars put into planning. We've come to an LPA. We've gone through a process, and I think, you know, as we go, there will, with this entire expansion program, there will continue to be points of conflict on tough decisions, major investments that we're making. And, you know, I would just say that we need to be able to trust that as we go through that process, we're going to get to the right decisions. And, you know, this is one of many projects that's going to come, and we don't want to be in a place where, as we're moving to design, you know, we're saying we've spent $7-10 million and we don't agree with the answer. Let's, you know, pause. So again, I would echo everything, you know, Jennifer said, but I would also say, like, this is a big point to me around our process and making sure that when we're getting to the point of design, that we feel like we've spent millions of dollars to get to where we all agree we should be. Because that's super important. And then the last thing I just add on there is with the community as well, and making sure that the community, we feel good about the community input process. We will not get consensus on every project, but we need to feel great about the process, and that's something as a board we need to be aligned on.
Thank you. Ms. Williamson.
And just for clarity, Kali, you said that, you know, even if we, you know, procure design services, you can continue those conversations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Any other questions or comments on agenda item number 7? I will entertain a motion. It has been moved and seconded. Board members, please vote. The resolution passes. Agenda item number 8 is a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for construction services for job order contracting 3.0 RFP P50289. Mr.
Authorization on the front end.
Ms. Scott.
I'm curious as to 3.0. What specifically is that, and how is it different if at all?
So if I recall correctly, the reason it's 3.0, it's just the third iteration of the JOC project program that we're going through. This is the next phase. It will encompass slightly larger projects that will give us more flexibility to complete things in a more timely and efficient fashion.
So the request, whatever construction company or services are provided now is not adequate, and so we need to extend it and go beyond where we are now?
Correct. The size of the contract and the scope is increasing exponentially, if I recall, and so it requires a new RFP instead of just trying to amend the current contract. But Ms. Holland can speak to it more.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Holland, Director of Contracts, Procurement, and Materials. The current contract for JOC, the contract for JOC expired a couple of years ago. This is a new contract, so JOC 2.0 did expire a few years back. Okay.
Oh, so this is the new contract?
This will be a
because one
new,
expired,
yes. This will
not an extension of one?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I needed to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Any other questions on agenda item number 8? I will entertain a motion. It has been moved and seconded. Board members, please vote. The resolution passes. Moving on to agenda item number 9. Other matters, Mr. Andrews, I believe we have a resolution from emanating out of executive session.
Yes, sir. We have 2. I'll read the captions in so we can amend the agenda to add them, and then I'll read the full individually. The first one is a resolution authorizing the submittal of the third round of acquisition offers and settlements for right-of-way and easements in support of the Summerhill Bus Rapid Transit Project, City of Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia. The second one is a resolution authorizing First Amendment of the ground lease with Clear Channel LLC.
Do I hear a motion to amend the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to add those 2 items to our agenda.
Do I hear a second? Moved and seconded. Please vote by raising of your hand. All in favor? All right, Mr. Andrews, on the first resolution, please read.
Sure. A resolution authorizing the submittal of third round of acquisition offers and settlements for right-of-way and easements in support of the Summerhill Bus Rapid Transit Project, City of Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia. Whereas pursuant to the MARTA Act of 1965 as amended, MARTA exists for purposes of planning, designing, leasing as leasee, purchasing, acquiring, holding, owning, constructing, improving, equipping, financing, maintaining, and administrating a rapid transit system with the metropolitan area and operating same. And whereas the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority's operations staff has identified a public need to acquire property within the City of Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia, and the city is within the territorial jurisdiction of MARTA. Whereas MARTA will expand its rapid transit system by developing, maintaining, and operating a bus rapid transit project, the Summerhill BRT, located within the city. And whereas MARTA Planning and Capital Programs has identified that certain real property located adjacent to the Summerhill BRT corridor, City of Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia, State of Georgia, for acquisition to facilitate the Summerhill BRT project, and whereas MARTA and the city executed a rapid transit contract and assistance agreement as amended and a project-based agreement executed on March 25, 2022, whereby the parties agreed to coordinate their efforts in regarding the expansion of MARTA's rapid transit system, including without limitation, the city agreeing to work with MARTA, and upon the request of MARTA to exercise its eminent domain power to acquire any property rights and interests necessary for MARTA to carry out its purposes as stated in the MARTA Act. And whereas upon the city's approval, MARTA will submit offers to the fee owner or owners of the properties in the amount of the appraised values. If negotiations for fair and equitable purchase terms are not successful, then MARTA will request the city initiate condemnation proceedings. Resolved, therefore, by the Board of Directors of the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority that in accordance with policies and procedures previously adopted by the Board, the acquisition of those real properties known as MARTA parcels B104, B122A, B123, B127, B128, B132, B139, B140, B173, B185, as identified as Exhibit A attached here to and incorporated herein by reference, are hereby determined to be necessary for the construction, operation, and maintenance of the authority's bus rapid transit system, and hereby is approved provided the acquisition costs do not exceed the estimates of just compensation as further identified in Exhibit A. Be it resolved, therefore, that the General Manager, CEO, or his delegate is hereby authorized to offer and execute acquisition agreements and/or other settlements with the fee simple owner or owners for the acquisitions of the properties, and in the event a mutual agreement or settlement is unsuccessful, to request the City of Atlanta to initiate condemnation proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Do I hear a motion to approve this resolution?
I'll make the motion.
Moved by Mr. Durrett, seconded by Mr. Pond. Any further discussion or debate? Please show that you are in favor by raising your hand. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Andrews, the second resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Resolution authorizing the First Amendment of ground lease with Clear Channel Outdoor LLC. Whereas on March 20th, 1998, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority entered into that certain ground lease with Clear Channel Outdoor LLC as successor in interest to Action Outdoor Advertising, Inc. for MARTA parcel N688. Whereas under the lease, the authority permitted Clear Channel to erect and maintain an advertising billboard on the property in exchange for the payment of rent throughout the term. Whereas after the authority's real estate department conducted an audit of the lease, it was determined that Clear Channel was not paying the authority the correct rental amount. Whereas Clear Channel disputed the authority's claim and refused to remit the same. And whereas the authority and Clear Channel entered into settlement negotiations and were able to successfully resolve the dispute. Resolved, therefore, by the Board of Directors of the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority that the General Manager, CEO, or his delegate be and hereby is authorized to execute the First Amendment to ground lease between the authority and Clear Channel, which will include the recoupment of outstanding amounts owed to the authority and an increase in the term of the ground lease that will result in increased rental receipts in the amount of $618,457.01, and to execute such other documents to fully settle any dispute between the parties.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Do I hear a motion from...
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the resolution.
Moved by Durrett. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Hartage. Any further discussions or debate? All, please vote in favor by raising your hand. Any opposed? The resolution passes unanimously. Are there any comments from other board members? Hearing none, we will adjourn this meeting of the February 9th, 2023 MARTA Board of Directors.